Hello, this is Howard Owens, publisher of the Batavian. We're doing another live stream interview. Today we're talking to James Kennedy. He's the U.S. Attorney for the Western New York District, and we're going to be talking a little bit about what's going on in his office, and then also we'll get into some of the fraud issues, and I think we're going to also talk about the Buffalo Federal Detention Center. So, wrong screen. Mr. Kennedy, there you are. How are you doing today?
Great, Howard. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate your time. So first of all, maybe just fill us in on how, what adjustments you've had to make and how the U.S. Attorney's Office is operating in the age of coronavirus.
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, like everybody else, the pandemic has impacted our operations here. Although I think, I know that much less so perhaps in the Western District of New York than in the other districts within the Second Circuit, which would include the other three federal judicial circuit or districts in New York State, the District of Vermont, and District also of Connecticut. We are the only district within the circuit that has been able to maintain our grand juries. So we had grand juries continue to meet throughout the pandemic, so that we've been able to accomplish some of our business, that is obviously charging people, protecting human life and providing human safety, preserving human safety throughout our community. I think that that's sort of the last thing that people need during this pandemic is to worry about becoming a victim of crime. So we've worked hard to maintain operations with the court. The court's been terrific in allowing us to continue to arrest people, prosecute crimes. Albeit now we're doing increasingly. We're using video teleconference court appearances, things like that, to conduct our operations. And while we've certainly gone to a lot of telework within throughout the district with offices both in Buffalo and Rochester, we have generally maintained a skeleton crew within the office to continue to do what we do, which is protect the citizens of Western New York. Howard, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I had the volume down. So does this change what what you choose to prosecute at this time? Are there cases that you hold off on because they're maybe lesser offenses and you want to have less contact?
Yeah, I do think that we've, I'd be lying to say that it's business as usual. We've identified and tried to, the cases that we're really looking at most closely and taking action on are those that endanger public safety. So we've had a huge roundup a couple days ago in Rochester involving fentanyl and fentanyl trafficking. We've done a number of those sorts of cases. We've done a number of cases involving child exploitation, with more children being at home and online for learning and things like that. We need to do all that we can to protect those kids because, let's face it, I mean, it's sort of unprecedented times. Much of, with schools closed and everything, a lot of kids are online, and it presents an opportunity for child predation. So we've been very proactive in our efforts, those sort of specific efforts to deal with public safety. Additionally, we've seen an increase in domestic violence. So to the extent that we have an opportunity to do things with some of the laws that Congress has enacted regarding gun crimes and things like that, we've been very proactive in sort of taking those cases. Some of the other cases are less violent cases. I mean, obviously, we continue to investigate them with our federal and state and local partners. But in terms of actually putting hands on people, arresting them, putting them in handcuffs, we've really focused our efforts on those of public safety. Now, another initiative, though, that we've also undertaken under the leadership of the Attorney General is all the fraud related to COVID-19, and whether it's related to the stimulus money that's being put out there by Congress, whether it's related to hoarding, price gouging, PPE, things like that. We're certainly being very aggressive in those cases as well.
We wanted to get into talk about fraud a little bit, and I think you also have some advice for consumers. What are you seeing out there in the area of coronavirus related fraud, and kind of what are your recommendations for the people of Western New York?
Well, I mean, what we're seeing is I was seeing a whole host of, I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of money being put out there by the federal government right now, and that presents a lot of opportunity for fraudsters. We saw it in the wake of Hurricane Katrina some years ago, even up here in Western New York, very remote from what happened down in New Orleans, but we had a number of those cases up here because there's a lot of money being put out there. So there's obviously then a lot of fraud associated with it. So what we're seeing are a number of online scams, individuals either you know saying that they have an ability to get money faster, things like that, where you can click on a link. It might be malware, it might be phishing software that allows the perpetrators to basically overtake your computer, hold you hostage, malware, ransomware, things like that. So we've seen that. We've seen, in terms of sort of the other side of the fraud, we've seen a lot with individuals offering PPE cures for coronavirus. There are no cures for coronavirus at this point. So, things like that, things that where people are offering to sell face masks, or they may not even have, or if they do have them, they're charging exorbitant prices. So, I mean, generally, my advice to the consumers of Western New York is if there is an offer that sounds too good to be true, it probably is. I would not click on no government agency, whether it's the IRS, whether it's any component, HHS, Small Business Administration. They are not going to be reaching out to individuals in our community with unsolicited emails. So if you get one of those that appear to be from one of those agencies, I would not click on the email. Instead, I would reach out, make a phone call, verify information, and there are ways. If you need information, don't click on links in emails. Go to the actual .gov website, or whether it's the IRS.gov or CDC.gov, anything like that, so that you can be sure that you're going to the authentic website. So, I mean, obviously, just as in the real world, in the virtual world, people and consumers need to be careful, know who they're doing business with, know what information they're sharing. The IRS or any government agency will not ask you for bank account information. They will not ask you for your social security number or things like that over an email. So if you get any requests like that, my advice is close out that email or hang up that phone, because I think that we need to be vigilant, as despite the fact that we're isolated, many of us in our own homes, we need to be vigilant in protecting ourselves, because these criminals are taking the crime to our phones and to our screens, and we need to be aware of that and be diligent in our efforts to protect ourselves. Can't hear you, Howard. Sorry.
With coronavirus, we always talk about the older residents, the elderly, being particularly vulnerable to the disease. I would think that would create fear with them and make them particularly vulnerable to being exploited. Are you seeing seniors particularly targeted in fraud cases?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is, certainly, I mean, the one thing the science has told us about this virus is the sort of disparate impact it has on the elderly and the infirm in our communities. And obviously, those are the people that are by and large perhaps less technically savvy than others. Because of that desperation, they may be more vulnerable to any sort of predators that are out there. So we've been very vigilant in our efforts to try and get the message out to the elderly community. I think that, Howard, you raised another interesting point as well. I think with these stay-at-home orders and a lot of the isolation, another thing that we've really seen a lot of is a dramatic increase in the number of overdose deaths in our community. And I think it's a combination of factors. It's individuals being home, being isolated, being fed this constant din of bad news and doom and gloom. I think it's they don't have access to whatever sort of counseling resources or programs that might allow them to treat these disorders. They're alone. They're using alone. They don't have access to Narcan. I mean, there's a host of issues, I think, that's unfortunately resulted in a tremendous increase in the number of overdose deaths. In the month of April in Erie County here, we had more overdose deaths, at least in the first 3 weeks of April, than we did COVID-19 deaths. So it's a very, it's a huge problem, and it's something that, we've been very vigilant in trying to get the word out and work with, with our partners in the community, so that the people that are stuck at home don't, make a bad situation worse by overdosing.
Are there specific resources you know of that people can reach out to who are dealing with drug issues?
Well, certainly, I think I would encourage them to reach out to their county health facilities. I mean, I know that in Erie County, Genesee County, Monroe County, I know that the county health officials are mindful of, sort of these collateral consequences of these stay-at-home orders and people being isolated. And certainly they have access, to remote treatment. I know in Erie County, for example, too, we've been use the Buffalo Police Department to deliver Narcan to food pantries so that individuals who may be stuck at home getting food, need to get food from a food pantry also have access to Narcan as well. So, I mean, there's a lot going on trying to sort of attack this problem. We had made such tremendous strides in Western New York. We're sort of the leading model for how to deal with opioids, but this has really set us back a fair bit, and it's something that's very important to me in my office. Because we have been so successful and we're working hard. And I know that the health commissioners, county health commissioners in all 17 counties here in the Western District are sensitive to the enhanced drug use issues that we're seeing associated with this virus.
Changing gears a little bit, and we kind of talked about this a little bit before we got started. The Buffalo Federal Detention Center, the Batavian's been the only news source I know of in Western New York that's reported that only 3 of the 49 positive tests there were symptomative, and we've reported a little bit on the efforts going on there to keep detainees safe and what some of the release issues have been, some of the protocols, and also just kind of the general sanitary practices going out there. Just what can you fill us in on as far as the situation at the center?
Well, I certainly appreciate the Batavian's accurate reporting on this because it is important. I mean, I think part of the push initially, at least when the pandemic began, was, it was viewed not only by the immigration community so much, but in the criminal justice community as sort of a get out of jail free card. And, we here at the Department of Justice wanted to make it clear and push back on that narrative because despite obviously, the seriousness of this disease, as you've noted, our federal detention centers are, which is run under as part of ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, but also our Department of Justice, the Bureau of Prisons, BOP facilities, have been very proactive in the manner in which they've tried to address this COVID-19 crisis. In Batavia, for example, 319 detainees are there roughly right now. Since the commencement of the pandemic, there have been 49 positive COVID cases. As you noted, though, most of those individuals were asymptomatic. There was 1 individual had a heart issue, 3 had mild respiratory distress. Those were the only symptomatic individuals there. And all told, there was 4 hospital admissions in, coming out of the federal detention center there in Batavia. 3 of those individuals that were taken to the hospital returned that night. 1, the individual with a heart issue, was kept overnight. Batavia had the 3rd most number of coronavirus cases of any immigration detention facility in the United States, and most of that was a result of an exposure in 1 housing unit. As a result, ICE, acting swiftly and decisively, tested everyone in that unit. And although most of them, as I said, were asymptomatic, there were 49 positive cases, and they've all told now tested 25% of their detainee population. But I'm happy to report that there have been no deaths at all at Batavia, and it's been 14 days now since the last positive test. And as a result, the quarantine there has ended. All cases have been recovered. I think, certainly that's a laudable situation that, obviously to not lose anyone to this in that facility, despite all the dire forecasts of doom and gloom. And again, I commend your newspaper for getting out the accurate information. And I can tell you too that because of the efficacy of their response, the Batavia Detention Center is going to start receiving inmates again in the very near future, if that hasn't already happened already. And the people that they're getting there are the individuals who have, prior criminal records. Again, going back to that dangerousness component that I spoke of earlier, which is what we're most concerned with. So, and the department itself has, within the Bureau of Prisons, undertaken home confinement, many measures to try and address, the outbreak within the BOP facilities. Look, we don't want to lose anybody that's in custody. No one, none of these individuals were sentenced to death, and that's not, we're not going to let that happen. And we've done, I think, nationally a tremendous job keeping our numbers, much below sort of the national average in terms of the mortality rates and things like that. And, because, we take our obligation to do justice, it doesn't just end at the time of conviction. It continues through incarceration and ultimate disposition. So, we're doing our best to look out for individuals that are, and I'd like to commend the men and women at Batavia, the hardworking members that work there, the individuals that work there, for doing such a tremendous job and risking their own lives to protect the lives of the inmates that they're guarding there.
I read a lot of the coverage, and particularly from scientific journals and stuff about COVID, and there's so much that we don't know still. There's a lot of things that are not in the realm of scientific certainty, even to the degree that's ever possible. And so, there's open questions about, will there be a second wave? If there is, how bad it'll be, and also how important is herd immunity possible? When will we have a vaccine? What treatments are out there? And experts disagree as to whether this is something that'll, clear away quickly, or we could be dealing with this for 2 or 3 years. And so my question is, in that longer time frame, do you think these federal criminal justice systems can kind of hold up under the strain of maybe operating under these constraints for that period of time?
Well, I don't know that we're going to operate under these constraints. We've had conversations with both with the court. Yesterday, I had a call with Chief Judge Gerasi, who is the Chief Judge of the United States District Court here in the Western District of New York. He and his staff. I had a conference call yesterday with the Attorney General of the United States, and we are starting slowly to ramp up. Now, we're going to follow many of the guidelines, that are local, and fortunately, that will, I think, we're a little bit ahead of the game in terms of, what the situation might be downstate. But as I said at the outset, one of the things that we're very fortunate about is that here in the Western District of New York, we've been able to maintain our grand juries. We're the only district in the entire Second Circuit that's been able to do that. So we have been able to function, present cases to the grand jury, return indictments and things. But I think you raise a very interesting point too, though, Howard, is one of the concerns that the Attorney General expressed yesterday is sort of this, the infringement on our constitutional rights associated with, some of these restrictions on liberty that we're experiencing. At the outset, as you said, much of the science maybe was not well understood, and still is not well understood, and that may justify perhaps a more invasive sort of reaction as to our constitutional rights. But I think there comes a point at which it becomes incumbent upon the government to justify its its infringement of individuals' rights to assembly, free speech, different things that we sort of take for granted, or hopefully take for granted. and want to get back to. And so there's this balancing act that has to be done. And I know that across the United States, we haven't really seen it in our district yet, and hopefully we won't at all. But I know that there's been certain statements of interest filed by the Department of Justice for whether it's state or municipal legislator or executive orders restricting certain, whether it's freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, targeting individuals perhaps based upon. There's a case in Mississippi where the Department of Justice filed a statement of interest where a minister down there was holding a Sunday service in a parking lot, broadcasting, across a radio to individuals whose windows were rolled up in the parking lot. And at the end of the service, the individuals in attendance were each issued a summons, had a $500 fine, while just a couple blocks away, individuals were free, to, with their windows go down, go to a fast food restaurant and obtain, food with no such restrictions. And so, we have to be very careful of the restrictions of our liberties. It's something that, I'm very concerned about, and it's a balancing where we need to be able to basically justify whatever restriction it is that we have in the interest of public safety. And if that can't be done, then we need to reconsider that restriction.
So would your office have a specific role if there were issues that arose around, let's say, same sort of situation arose here where a church wanted to exercise its First Amendment rights to, operate without government constraint, and the state was, New York State specifically, was interfering with that. Does your office have a role in that, or is it more just philosophical, trying to remind people in the government what the government's limitations are?
Well, it's both. We certainly want to remind people of, people need to be cognizant of their rights, and we have, as we always are at the Department of Justice, vigilant in the protection of those rights. So what we've done in those instances where there has been sort of this disparate treatment, we've filed what's known as a statement of interest, where we basically put forth to the court litigating whatever the dispute is between the private litigants, whether it's a municipality and a minister, or a municipality and some public group, and where we file a statement of interest expressing what our view of sort of the constitutional balancing that needs to be done, and whether a particular restriction can be justified under the Constitution. And I mean, there's not a one size fits all. I mean, it would vary by geographic location. I mean, a location which is very extremely hard hit, for example, New York City, might be completely different from something going on in Montana or Wyoming, where the virus is not nearly as prevalent. So I mean, those are all factors that we have to weigh. And the 93, as one of the 93 U.S. attorneys, that's sort of our job, is to know our district and know what's going on and try and pay attention to these things. And if individuals are concerned, they should reach out to us and let us know that if they feel that there's some unconstitutional restriction to what they're doing. But in many cases, things like I think less objectionable are requirements, things like wearing masks, gloves. Although people may not like them, they are, I think, somewhat at least directly related to the interest of slowing the transmission of the disease and things like that. So I mean, those are one thing. More restrictive, keeping businesses closed and things. We're starting, obviously we're all recognizing the economic impact that that's having. And, there will be a process. It's going to take a little time. I understand that, but, I think we have to be moving in that direction at this point.
Do you have any specific messages for local law enforcement, sheriffs and city chiefs of police might be called on to enforce some of these regulations? Do you have any specific messages for them on suggestions on how they approach these issues?
No, I would say if they have questions, I mean, obviously they work for the municipalities, but they also, with if there's constitutional questions, if they have serious constitutional questions, I'd urge them to reach out. I mean, I have within my office a law enforcement coordinator who liaisons daily with members of state and local law enforcement to answer their questions. So, if any of them have concerns, they know how to get a hold. Sam Palmieri is our law enforcement coordinator here in the Western District of New York. They know how to get a hold of Sam, and certainly can reach out if they have questions for him. But, I mean, again, I'm not looking to pick a fight here. I'm not looking to suggest that, that there's been anything improper occurring in our district at this point, but it is something that, I think it's on everybody's minds these days is, getting back to, and if you just think about it historically, I mean, it's unprecedented to, have businesses be told that they can't do business, that they have to close, individuals to be told that they have to stay at home. Um, Really unprecedented in our times. And so I think, I want to, on behalf of the Department of Justice, remind individuals that, we need to be, respectful of the authority of the individuals who, at the state and local level probably have their pulse most readily on the data and the evidence and the science, particular to, a particular region or location, and hopefully they're acting in the interests of preserving the health. And as long as they're doing that and the public safety, they're probably, and as long as there's a rational relationship between whatever they're restricting and what they're trying to protect, they should be fine. But if it becomes where they're sort of signaling out certain groups, certain activities, that's where it could become problematic, and that's what we'll take a look at.
I think what you're saying is their approach needs to be sort of content neutral, uh, applied equally.
Much like the First Amendment, yes.
So the constitutional stuff's a very fascinating discussion. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Was there anything else that you wanted to touch on today?
No, I know it's sort of it's been obviously for all of us, no matter our profession, this has been sort of a very challenging experience. But I want the public to know that throughout the brave men and women of law enforcement, people in my office, people at all levels of law enforcement have remained vigilant because, as I said at the outset, the last thing anyone needs now with this pandemic is to become the victim of a crime. So we're open for business. We're continuing to prosecute cases. We're continuing to do our best to protect the public and to provide justice to all of the citizens of Western New York.
Well, Mr. Kennedy, that's good to know. I appreciate your time today, and I hope you and your family are able to stay safe and take care.
You too, Howard. Thanks very much. Same to you.
So this is Howard Owens with the Batavian. We've been talking to James Kennedy, the U.S. Attorney for Western New York, and just touching on a few issues related to coronavirus. And we're going to have another live stream interview later this afternoon with Tori Goring, a dog trainer. So interesting shift there. So thank you all for tuning in.